Greetings, magical mavens. The summer solstice is just around the corner on June 20th. Can you believe it's almost here already? Like, when did it become June? Anyway, in the northern hemisphere, this moment in late June is the longest day and the shortest night of the year, a powerful moment of balance corresponding to the witch's sabbat known as Litha, a celebration of the height of the sun's power before the days begin to shorten again. It's a time that energetically supports us to shine our brightest, power up, and celebrate how far we've come at this checkpoint halfway through the year. In this video, I'll be sharing with you 8 fun and powerful ways to harness the energy of this time of year by tapping into all 4 elements. Above and beyond just the typical traditions you've probably heard about a million times over, instead, we're diving much deeper into how to harness the actual astrology of the season to maximize our joy and fulfillment throughout the midsummer season. Here on this channel, we like to embrace a slower living approach to celebrating the wheel of the year, not cramming all of our traditions into one day or even just the week surrounding the Sabbat, but instead gradually embracing each season for multiple weeks surrounding each Sabbat. And this approach is beautifully supported by astrology. If you're new to the concept of how zodiac signs and the witchy wheel of the year are intrinsically linked, you are in for a treat. In the first 3 videos in this series, I've already gone deeply into detail on exactly how mind-blowing this correlation is, so I'm not going to take too much time in this video going over it again. But in short, the Wheel of the Year and the Pagan Sabbat Wheel are one and the same thing. It's just that the Sabbat system breaks the year up into 8 parts, whereas the zodiac astrology breaks it up into 12. The main anchor points are still the solstices, equinoxes, and cross quarters, but where in witchcraft each quarter of the year is divided into 2 Sabbat seasons, astrology splits up each quarter of the year into 3 phases, providing an even deeper and more nuanced perspective of how the plant, tend, harvest, compost cycle works in the universe through the magic of the power of 3. Just like in the visible phases of the moon that make up the triple moon symbol that we like to use as witches, this maiden mother crone concept also appears in the phases of each season. Where the Sabbats show us how each of the 4 main seasons has an early and a late phase, astrology shows us a more zoomed in view of each season's beginning, middle, and end. It also ties in with a balance of the elements and helps us make sense out of lunar manifesting, balancing our moods, and so much more. Astrology can seem really complicated, but if you're at all familiar with the Witchy Wheel of the Year, you're already well on your way to understanding astrology. The basic concept of the Sabbats provides the base level framework of how astrology works, and you can easily build your knowledge from that place. If you're curious about these mind-blowing details of how all these things in the universe fit together perfectly, I definitely invite you to go back and watch the introduction video to this series. But for this video, we're looking at the astrology of the summer solstice and how to celebrate using these more nuanced astrological themes. The summer solstice is one of the most magical days of the year, and various cultures have used it to mark the passing of time and the cycle of the seasons. For some who follow a Neo-Celtic approach to the magical path, the summer solstice can represent midsummer because it's said that the ancient Celts only recognized 2 seasons, summer and winter. The warmer, lighter half of the year that began at the spring equinox is now at its center point, and it'll end at the autumn equinox. However, if like me, if you're more of the school of thought that there are at least 4 seasons, and or if, again like me, you live in a cooler, more northern climate than, say, Ireland, where some of these concepts originate from, it likely makes more sense for the solstice to mark the beginning of true summer. And I personally also happen to love that this concept seems to be perfectly supported by astrology. See, Gemini, which is the astrological season that we're currently in, is the 3rd sign of the zodiac and the 3rd sign of spring. While it isn't always recognized as having a direct Sabbat correspondence, like all zodiac signs, it plays a key role in the story that's being told by the Sabbats and the seasons. Gemini season represents the last of 3 phases of the spring season, and it ends on the astrological last day of spring. The sun moves out of the sign of Gemini at the moment of the astronomical event known as the summer solstice in the northern hemisphere. Gemini energy is related to the divine masculine air element, and its main theme is versatility. It also deals with themes of curiosity, communication, thoughts, ideas, word magic, and play. The archetype of Gemini is the magician aspect of our personality, and this time of year invites us to get curious about what's possible and update our communications with self and others to playfully spark new inspiration. This period between about May 20th and June 21st is a time to get playfully curious about what kind of fun and fulfillment can be had and shared in the summer season ahead. In astrology, a sign is associated with the beginning, middle, and end of each of the main 4 seasons. So Aries, which started back at the spring equinox, is the cardinal or first sign of spring. Then Beltane landed in the middle of Taurus season, which was the second zodiac sign and the fixed sign of spring, aka the middle, height, and epitome of spring. Now Gemini is the mutable or final sign of spring, giving way to summer. And while it doesn't start on a sabbat or have a sabbat right in the middle of it, it ends the moment before the next sabbat. See how it works? Oftentimes, folks find it easy to remember that Beltane corresponds to Taurus and Litha corresponds to Cancer season, but mutable signs like Gemini often get overlooked in the generalized correspondences of sabbats and zodiacs. But as you can see, it provides so much wisdom when we slow down and tap into it. Cardinal and fixed signs are easier to remember when it comes to their zodiac correspondences because those 8 zodiac signs all either start on a solstice or equinox or have a cross-quarter sabbat/Celtic fire festival that takes place right in the middle of them. But that leaves 4 zodiac seasons, the mutable signs, which lead us through the final days of each of the main 4 seasons and right up to the next solstice or equinox. So for those of us in this community who like to celebrate about the 6 weeks surrounding each sabbat, Gemini is essentially a time when we start shifting out of spring mode and begin gradually adapting into the summer phase. It's that preparing for Litha time period. The symbol for Gemini is the twins or the lovers, sometimes even conjoined twins or the alchemical hermaphrodite, essentially a pair of kindred spirits interacting with one another. The glyph for Gemini looks kind of like the Roman numeral 2. The ruling planet of Gemini is Mercury, the luminary named for the god of cleverness in the ancient Greco-Roman pantheon, and the god of alchemy. Named Hermes by the Greeks and Mercury by the Romans, he ruled over themes such as communication, travel, commerce, and cunning. As the messenger of the gods, he was known for his swiftness and agility, symbolizing quick thinking and adaptability. Additionally, Mercury/Hermes was revered as a guide for souls to the afterlife, emphasizing his role in transitions and transformations. His multifaceted nature reflects the complexity of human experiences and the importance of embracing change and adaptability in our lives. The key phrase for Gemini is "I think," and it represents the magician archetype, someone who recognizes the creative power of the mind and embraces manifestation magic. Just like every sabbat has its opposite on the wheel of the year, so too does every zodiac sign. We're empowered to achieve balance each season by being mindful of the spectrum between the two. So just as Litha, or the summer solstice, is opposite the wheel of the year from Yule, or the winter solstice, the opposite of Gemini is Sagittarius, the mutable sign that completes the fall season 6 months later. Also often thought of as the holiday season leading up to Yule. But what we notice about these opposites is that they aren't true opposites, just opposite sides of the same spectrum of themes. Gemini, leading up to Litha, deals with themes of getting geared up to emerge from hibernation for summer, whereas Sagittarius, leading up to Yule, deals with themes of getting ready for the season of hibernation. Both can be social signs though, because in the spring season, we're coming out of hibernation and starting to connect with others again, whereas during Sagittarius season, we're kind of having that final hurrah, that big party, so to say, before then retreating into hibernation. At least that's the way I tend to think of it. The universal theme of the Gemini/Sagittarius axis is the balance between our intellectual pursuits and our spiritual growth, our need for variety versus our quest for deeper meaning, and our desire for connection versus our thirst for freedom. To be honest, this axis has been a little bit more difficult for me to grasp and explain in words than some of the more straightforward ones we've talked about so far in the series, even though Gemini rules over themes of putting things into words, and Gemini also happens to be my rising sign, meaning that Mercury is my chart ruler. But I think the reason Gemini itself was kind of hard to explain is because it's kind of an all over the place energy. It's literally mercurial and hard to pin down and define. It's a playful, flirtatious, shape-shifty energy, even encompassing themes like the trickster archetype and gender fluidity. From a personal perspective, it almost makes me think of those fuzzy seeds that seem to fall from the sky and float around in every direction in late spring. Airy, transient things that react with all four elements to playfully create new possible directions for life to bloom. To me, the axis of Gemini and Sagittarius is the spectrum between being multiple things at once versus being singularly focused. While they both deal with themes of curiosity, adventurousness, transformation, and the more philosophical side of the divine masculine energy, they differ in the way that they go about those themes. While Gemini can be psychological in a playfully curious way, it isn't necessarily committed to a clear path, role, or purpose, almost playing devil's advocate or chaotic neutral. Sagittarius, on the other hand, is on more of a specific quest to set out and create, learn, or prove something in particular, based on its ideals and desire for deeper meaning. It's open-minded and open to having its perspective changed, but it kind of comes from an approach of having or desiring a single-pointed perspective. Whereas Gemini is all about duality and multiple meanings and paradoxes. In our lives, as in nature, it's always important to maintain a sense of balance, and the Wheel of the Year demonstrates for us that balance comes in many forms. There's a time and place for everything. It isn't always about a perfect state of neutral moderation. Gemini season is an example of a time when the scales are tipped towards intellectual curiosity and a time for sort of playing the field of possibility, rather than being too attached or tied down to one rigid plan or belief system. A time of curious experimentation, almost like the chaos magic path in witchcraft. But at the same time, the balance is there when we look closely at the seasonal cycles at play. This is often exhibited in our witchy traditions as we celebrate the Wheel of the Year. For example, in my practice as a domestic witch and a green witch, the end of spring is a time of transitioning out of garden planning stage and into the actual outdoor growing season. While I'm embracing that Sagittarius side of the spectrum by aiming for the goal of having an abundant harvest, my Gemini rising self tends to be doing playfully curious gardening experiments more so than ever fully following all the standard rules of garden planning this time of year. I'm not one of those homesteaders who has every single detail of their growing season planned out or has a strict goal of producing X amount of food or being attached to the idea of harvesting a non-negotiable list of crops. I'm okay with being a recreational grower of some of my food and a consumer of groceries when it suits me. I'm open to having some of this and some of that, and I'm grateful for just the fun of interacting with the elements in this interesting way of gardening, embodying the themes of Gemini. Whereas 6 months from now in Sagittarius season, I will need to have more of a clear goal and the discipline needed to properly harvest and preserve what I've grown and put the garden to rest to set myself up for success in the next year. The more focused Sagittarius energy will have me taking note of what did and didn't work and honing in my practices for the next round, so that when I'm back in playful Gemini season next year, more of what I experiment with in the garden will actually work for me. It's kind of like how it's said that the only way to start a new venture is to stop aiming for perfection and just play around at first to see what happens. Then you'll start to learn from experience and be able to have even more fun in the next round after learning through experimentation. Gemini is kind of like planting those seeds playfully, and then Sagittarius 6 months later is about finishing what you started, wrapping up your goals and intentions, and bringing in the harvest. And interestingly enough, the actual astrology of each zodiac season supports this concept of balance. For every Gemini season contains within it a full moon in the opposite sign of Sagittarius. You see, when the sun is in any sign, the full moon has to take place in the opposite sign, because the full moon is a type of transit known as an opposition, meaning that the sun and moon are on opposite sides of the solar system, which is why we're able to see the reflection of the sun's light illuminating the entire face of the moon. This year, the full moon in Sagittarius was on May 23rd, shortly after the sun went into Gemini. These are just the kinds of things in my witchy practice that get me really excited to nerd out over the wonders of the universe. By celebrating both the solar sabbat and embracing its opposite by celebrating the full moon, we're able to accept the universe's gift of perfect balance during any given season. And as if that wasn't all mind-blowing enough, there's more. There's also a way to tune into balancing all 4 elements within this astrological approach to seasonal living. Just like the sun cycles through the 12 signs, leading it to also cycle through each of the 4 elements 3 times per year, the moon also does the exact same thing, only on a monthly basis instead of yearly. During each moon cycle, the moon spends a couple of days in each of the 12 signs. And when we take note of the 4 main phases of the lunar cycle, aka the new moon, first quarter moon, full moon, and last quarter, we get a perfect dose of all 4 elements. So surrounding this Gemini season, we have that full moon in Sagittarius, the mutable sign of the masculine fire element. Then we have the last quarter waning moon in the sign of Pisces, which is the mutable sign of the feminine water element. Then there's the new moon in Gemini, the mutable sign of the masculine air element. This is the obligatory conjunction between the sun and moon that results in the predictable new moon that always happens in the same sign that the sun is in each zodiac season. And finally, there's the first quarter waxing moon in Virgo, Virgo being the mutable sign of the divine feminine earth element. Now, notice that I pointed out how all 4 of these main moon phases are taking place in mutable signs, which reinforces the overarching theme of Gemini season being a time of transition. And notice how we can tune into the elements and their alternating masculine and feminine affinities to both be exerting energy effectively and be open to receiving the benefits of doing so. From there, we'll shift out of this chapter of mutable energy and into a new pattern relating to the cardinal signs of the zodiac in time for Cancer season, which starts on the summer solstice. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I really wasn't consistent with lunar astrology until fairly recently, as in the past 2 years or so, because in our busy lives, this practice of paying attention to not just the moon phase, but also the sign, and the element and the gender and all of that can seem really overwhelming or easy to lose track of unless you have an understanding of how it works, as well as an actual system in place to help you keep up with it. But after committing to practicing this for a little while, I saw how magical, inspiring, and beneficial it could be in my cyclical living practice. And that's why I front-loaded the work of researching the dates and phases and signs and creating prompts and notifications that not only remind us of when they are, but also provide a super simple template for learning the patterns and embodying the themes ourselves. I've done all of the work for you and for myself so that we can enjoy the flow of it going forward. So if this aspect of cyclical living inspires you, but you don't want to take up too much time and energy each week, then the Writing Witch Coven is definitely where you want to be. It's also for you if you're feeling really inspired by all of this mind-blowing information in this video so far. This series is packed with powerful information that you're gonna want to remember, and since I want you to be able to retain and implement it in empowering ways as I've been learning to do, you don't have to worry about writing any of this down. Members of the Build Your Complete Grimoire tier in the Writing Witch Coven on Patreon receive a grimoire chapter for their binder this month that's essentially a written version of everything we're going over in this video. They're also getting my hand-drawn coloring sheets for the spring zodiac season. So if you enjoy a relaxing ritual of coloring with your cup of coffee in the morning, you're definitely going to want to join us this month. Each member receives my beautifully designed grimoire prompt pages, as well as notifications when it's an important astrological phase or seasonal checkpoint, so you never have to feel like you're falling out of tune with the cycles of nature. Depending on which tier you decide to join, you'll get access to lunar astrology prompts only, or you can upgrade to join our yearly seasonal living challenge, where we journal and set intentions on the themes of the 8 sabbats in the 6 weeks surrounding each checkpoint on the Wheel of the Year. Or upgrade to the top tier, the grimoire building tier, which gets all of the above, plus a handmade Book of Shadows binder and a whole new set of themed information pages and prompt pages each month, which in 2024 includes a beautiful transcript of each zodiac video. Okay, so now that we're done nerding out about the what and the why of Gemini season and where it fits into the Wheel of the Year, let's shift gears into embodiment by delving into the how to celebrate the season. Here are 4 powerful themes of Gemini season using the 4 elements as a guide. How you go about embodying these themes will differ depending on what your goals and practice are like, but for real-world examples, I'll share with you how I'm embracing these themes. You can plan to focus on one theme per week in alignment with the elements of the 4 main moon phases discussed above, or you can simply go about them whenever you feel inspired to do so throughout the season. There are no rules here. Water. Magically charged water. Did you know that water can be programmed like a crystal? Research has shown that water holds energy and even reacts to the words that are spoken over it to reflect the vibration of those words. Gemini season is the perfect time to play with this idea, even above and beyond the simple bath rituals we talked about in earlier videos in the series. Gemini represents the magician archetype and is said to rule over word magic and alchemy. What better way to embrace these kinds of themes than to do some more formal water programming spells? Now, I put the word formal in quotations because it doesn't have to be anything crazy or over the top. Gemini energy is about playfulness and spontaneity, not rules and structure. I just meant more formal in the sense of more official than your regular everyday rituals that have almost become mundane routines. For example, I always chant a mantra in my mind anytime that I'm handling water. It's literally become second nature to me because I know how powerful it is to work with water. But Gemini season is a great time to go out of my way and do something above and beyond that that's more focused and more curiously playful. I invite you to be curiously creative and craft a ritual where you use your words to program water and create a potion of some kind. Maybe even something fun and cheeky like your own version of the Felix elixir from Harry Potter. Release attachment to doing the spell quote-unquote correctly or by the book. Or even release worrying too much about whether or not the spell will go according to plan. Embrace Gemini vibes by simply being experimental and off the cuff just to see what happens. Again, kind of like chaos magic if you're familiar with that tradition. Bonus points if you're able to capture rainwater during the Gemini season. I actually lucked out this year and was able to gather some from an epic rainstorm that we had on the Gemini new moon. Since Gemini is my rising sign and Mercury is my chart ruler, I used this moon as a sort of personal rebirth for the year, and used the water as a representation of that. I always keep a bottle of water on my altar as a representation of the element, and I use a poem I wrote about the elements while handling each elemental representation in my morning ritual. You may know that poem if you listened to my podcast prior to this past year when I changed the intro song. So now, during my ritual, when I say, "Of water I evoke connection with kindred souls and self-reflection," I'll be repeatedly programming this Gemini new moon water with this intention. Your water programming ritual may look totally different. Be like Gemini and have fun with whatever ideas you can think of on your own. Earth, a wild foraged meal to transition into summer. What's lovely about Gemini season is that by this time in the very late spring, even colder climates like mine usually have some greens and blossoms springing forth, many of which are edible. Mother Nature knows that creatures like us are coming out of hibernation and shifting into a season in which we'll have different needs than we did in the winter. That's why some of the first edible plants that spring up have nutritional and medicinal properties that help our bodies and minds adapt for the new season ahead. And in the Gemini spirit of curious play, why not go on a sort of Easter egg hunt for edibles to make a magical salad or soup to step into the summer on the right foot? Or, like me, who's now obsessed with this concept of foraged savory pies, you might want to try this. It might be the best thing that I've ever eaten. You're basically just creating a sort of custard out of any greens of your choosing, some dairy, and then throwing it into a pie crust. It is so good. What you'll be able to find growing out in nature will vary depending on where you live, so feel free, in fact I strongly encourage you, to do your own research. But here's a list of common seasonal plants you may wish to include. Your dish doesn't need to be entirely composed of foraged plants either. You can make a salad with mixed greens from the grocery store and top it with violets, clovers, and dandelions if that's what's growing near you. Or you can simply make your favorite beans and greens soup recipe, substituting nettle for the spinach or something like that. And as always with foraging, double and triple check trusted resources just to make sure that you're properly identifying plants before handling them, let alone eating them, and avoid harvesting from areas that are likely to be contaminated. And of course, research to make sure each plant is safe for you personally. Some things have contraindications. For example, many plants are not recommended during pregnancy. Some plants I've identified and or want to try include dandelions, violets, clovers, stinging nettle, dead nettle, wild mustard, rocket, willow, plantain, pine, spruce, mugwort, fruit and berry blossoms, hawthorn flowers, vervain, lemon balm, burdock, mullein, honeysuckle, daisies, chickweed, horehound, and ground ivy. This practice is not only fun and healthy, but it also connects us to the spirit of the land we live on. I'm convinced that it's due in part to my taking up of foraging last year that I was able to manifest actual land to live on, despite not seeing how I could escape the city apartment life at the time. In fact, my biggest and most exciting foraging experience last year when I harvested that massive chicken of the woods mushroom, that ended up actually being right on the same land that I now live on, and I had no idea that that was going to happen, so there's something to be said. When we make an effort to learn about and interact with Mother Earth, she has a way of giving us more and more to be grateful for. Foraging is something I've grown very passionate about in recent years, and I've also gotten quite good at incorporating foraged foods into healthy and delicious recipes. So after years of learning, experimenting, and sharing little bits here and there, I've finally been called to start sharing a lot more about these subjects for those who wish to learn from my experience. So I just recently started a whole new YouTube channel just for green witchy and cottage witchy adventures. And I just posted a video where I shared my entire story of how I manifested my new home and garden. So if you haven't already, I would love to invite you to subscribe over there and say hello. Air. Learn about nature and herblore. With Gemini being an air sign, it may come as a surprise that it's somewhat prominently associated with herbology. But hear me out. See, Gemini is ruled by Mercury, which also has a more earthy expression as well as airy. Mercury also rules Virgo season, an earth sign, and one of the signs that's most related to herblore, with its symbol being a woman with a harvested plant. And of course, Virgo, which takes place right before the autumn equinox, is the start of harvest season, so it all makes sense. But furthermore, Mercury, being the god of commerce, also became the god of pharmaceuticals. If someone had an herbal medicine or a quote-unquote cure for sale in the market, they could be identified by having a sign with Mercury's symbol on it, the caduceus, which we still use as one of the most universal symbols for medicine for sale to this day. An interesting thing that we discover when we begin learning about the concept of planetary rulership in herbology is that Mercury is said to be the traditional ruler of a majority of plants. There's a few different reasons for that. Firstly, there's a general understanding that all plants are technically of the earth element, so to distinguish their properties from one another, they're typically associated with one of the other three elements, unless the part primarily used is the root. Also, herbal correspondences date back from a time when telescopes weren't invented. So, along with ancient modalities like classical astrology and alchemy, herbology mainly only recognizes 7 heavenly bodies instead of the 9+ that we work with now. Mercury was one of those original 7 that were visible to the naked eye. And to rack up its number of plants even more, Mercury is a planet that rules more than one sign, so it corresponds to plants ruled by both Gemini and Virgo, going back to that theme of being more than one thing at the same time. Another reason why so many plants are ruled by Mercury is because Mercury tends to be associated with plants that have aromatic and airy qualities, which include a lot of different plants. If it's highly fragrant, medicinal, wispy in appearance, and/or has long stalks or flowers that blow in the wind, there's a good chance that it's traditionally ruled by Mercury. These are just a few interesting facts about Mercury, Gemini, and Herblore, but regardless of whether you care about planetary rulership, which you absolutely don't to be a green witch, by the way, herbology is a vast subject with subgenres for just about every curious mind. If you're a folk witch, you can take Gemini season to research more about folk practices associated with plants, including how they got their common names, stories associated with them, etc. Now, I don't consider myself a traditional witch, but I like to dabble in a bit of everything. And one thing that I've noticed in the traditional witch path is that a lot of people tend to want to focus on plants that were traditional for maybe where their ancestors came from, or maybe just England in general, since the concept of quote-unquote traditional witchcraft seems to be associated with that area, which is fine. That's super interesting. But to take it a step further, if you haven't already, I definitely invite you to learn some traditional folklore of the plants that are actually growing in the area where you live now. That's not only going to be practically helpful to you because it's in your environment and you have access to it, but it's also going to open up your mind to the cultures that existed in the place where you live now and that maybe still exist there as we speak. It's just much more Gemini to be open-minded and expand beyond what you're currently used to. And in turn, if you are already super familiar with your own area, maybe branch out and learn about other areas that interest you. If you're a kitchen witch, you might want to learn more about ways to cook with plants, in which case the videos I'm releasing on my new channel will be a great resource. If you're big into spellcraft, you might want to learn more about local plants that can be used in your magical workings, etc., etc. We actually did a full grimoire section on herbology and how to create your own list of go-to magical plants a while back on Patreon. The downloads are still available in the printable library for new members, along with every chapter that we've done so far, by the way. So if that's something that you're interested in, see the Build Your Complete Grimoire tier of the Writing Witch Coven. Fire. Try your hand at some kitchen alchemy. Mercury/Hermes, the god of alchemy, embodies the transformational power of change and evolution. In alchemy, Mercury symbolizes the process of transmutation, where base elements are transformed into gold, representing spiritual enlightenment and inner growth. As the messenger of the gods, Mercury guides us through the alchemical journey of self-discovery and personal transformation. While the concept of alchemy may appear distant or ancient, very far away and long ago, so to speak, its principle can be applied to a modern context. The art of brewing wine, for example, embodies elements of alchemy, with the transformation of grapes into a complex and refined beverage, mirroring the alchemical process of transmutation. And better yet, did you know that you can brew your own wine easily at home? This late spring season, leading up to the summer solstice, is traditionally a time for home brewing. While autumn is more so a season for brewing grape wine or apple cider, Spring can be a great time to make mead. Mead is a delightful fermented beverage made from honey, water, and sometimes fruits, spices, herbs, flowers, or grains. It has a rich history dating back to ancient times and multiple different cultures, and is often associated with celebrations and rituals. The process of making mead involves fermenting honey with water and other ingredients, resulting in a sweet and flavorful drink that, with its light golden color and origin as flowers alchemized into the nectar of the gods by the sacred bees, seems to remind many of us of sunlight alchemized into a liquid. The art of mead making allows for creativity and experimentation and is relatively easy compared to some other home brewing methods, which makes it a very fun and rewarding activity for Gemini season, for those of us who are looking to explore the world of home brewing in a playful way. I like to make actual honey wine, but if you're underage or not into alcohol, I've also seen recipes for non-alcoholic lacto-fermented mead, which is more like a honey kombucha, but without needing that slimy SCOBY. In my personal experience, curiously playing around with home brewing for the past few years, mead is the easiest type of home brew to make. Where fruit wines and ales can be a little bit more temperamental and are recommended to be made with special strains of yeast that are less accessible, mead is easily made with just 3 very accessible ingredients, and in my experience, pretty much always turns out amazing. There's a lot you can do with mead, both magically and flavor-wise, but in the most basic form, all you need to make your own mead is some honey, water, and regular bread yeast that you can find in any grocery store. You'll also need a large container with a lid that fits snugly enough that bugs and lots of air can't get into it, but loose enough that the gases can escape from the contents as the fermentation process progresses. It'll also need to be able to sit in a dark place for some time, at least a few days up to a few months. So Gemini season is actually the perfect time to make this ahead for the summer solstice season, a time when mead is traditionally drank. In fact, after I'm done recording this video, I'm going to go ahead and start some mead that will be ready about 10 days from now, which will be the summer solstice. And if you want to make a celebratory drink specifically for Litha, you can also add in fruits, flowers, herbs of the season, or whatever you'd like. Okay, so now that we have done our deep dive into Gemini season, which is leading us up to the summer solstice, let's go ahead and shift over to Cancer season, which takes place in the weeks immediately following the summer solstice. Cancer is the 4th sign of the zodiac, and it's the first official sign of the summer season. From a seasonal living perspective, the moment the sun moves into the sign of Cancer is the astronomical summer solstice in the northern hemisphere, and it's the winter solstice in the southern hemisphere. So while many of us in the pagan and witchy community tend to choose a day on the Gregorian calendar to celebrate Litha every year, or Yule if you're down under, the modern calendar and the astrological calendar don't always match up perfectly, so the actual date of this occurrence can vary slightly from year to year. For example, I tend to think of Litha as a sabbat that takes place between June 20th and 22nd, but actually the sun moves into Cancer this year on March 20th at about 4:51 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Some practitioners like to be hyper aware of the exact dates and times of the astrology each unique year as they're planning their observances, celebrations, and rituals. And while I find the idea of that really cool, in my practice, I am far more concerned with a slow living / seasonal living approach to the witchy path, more so than being strict with myself to try and get things done on exact dates or times. So I do find it valuable to be aware of when the sun changes signs, but rather than worrying too much about that, I prefer to flow through the shift more fluidly as I gradually embody the themes of each season. An easy way to remember when to check the changing of the zodiac signs is to keep in mind that it always happens within a few days of the 20th of every month on the Gregorian calendar. Cancer energy is related to the divine feminine water element, and its main themes are feelings and receptivity. It's also protective, so that coziness and comfort are kept safe, ruling over the home life and family. Cancer energy is the kind of intuitiveness that's related to emotions and understanding the wants and needs of ourselves and others so that we can be more nurturing. It's almost like Cancer rules over the concept of self-care in a way, but it's also the archetype of the mother. So it's about self-care as well as care for others. So it's a season that invites us to emotionally sense what's needed and what to do to nurture oneself and others. This period between about June 21st and about July 22nd is a great time to set intentions related to intuition, emotion, home, family, safety, and comfort. Cancer's alchemical element is water, the element of emotion, spirituality, psychic awareness, fluidity, and nurturing. Cancer's quality or modality is cardinal, the modality related to kickstarting a new season. In the case of Cancer, it's both the start of the summer season here in the Northern Hemisphere and the start of winter in the Southern Hemisphere. On the Wheel of the Year, Litha is often represented as a time to get comfortable in your summer version of yourself and celebrate the nourishing and nurturing energy of the summer season. But what's cool about it is if you think about the Southern Hemisphere, that concept of coziness, comfort, and the home totally gives all of those cozy vibes of stepping into winter as well. The symbol for Cancer is the crab or lobster, an animal that both represents the water element and is safely encased in a shell, representing the protective comfort of home. The glyph looks kind of like the claws of a crab. The ruling planet is Neptune, the planet named for the god of the sea in the ancient Greco-Roman pantheon. Named Poseidon by the Greeks and Neptune by the Romans, he was the archetype that ruled over water, but was also venerated as controlling whether the land would be stable or if it would be shaken by earthquakes. He was prayed to for stability and safety, both by land dwellers and seafarers. The key phrase for Cancer is "I feel," and it represents being led by the heart. In this way, it almost seems to represent the emotional mood of nature in a way, and how that can be directly related to our ability to be stable and comfortable and nurtured. The opposite of Cancer is Capricorn, the cardinal sign that kicks off the winter season 6 months later, around the 20th of December. And as a quick side note, I learned while researching the date of the solstice this year about the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn. As we know in astrology, Cancer and Capricorn are opposite on the Wheel of the Year. So it was interesting to learn that there are latitude lines on Earth named for these signs. The Tropic of Cancer, also known as the Northern Tropic, is the northernmost circle of latitude on the Earth at which the sun is perceived to be directly overhead. This occurs on the June solstice when the Northern Hemisphere is tilted towards the sun to its maximum extent. The sun also reaches 90 degrees below the horizon at solar midnight on the December solstice, its southern hemisphere counterpart. Marking the most southerly position at which the sun can be viewed directly overhead is the Tropic of Cancer. These tropics are 2 of 5 major circles of latitude that mark the maps of the Earth, and the others are the Arctic and Antarctic circles, as well as the equator. I just thought that was interesting to throw in. But in any case, we know that these supposed opposites aren't really true opposites, but just opposite sides of the same coin. Cancer/Litha deals with themes of embracing your comfort zone and inner fulfillment, whereas Capricorn and Yule deal with themes of getting out of your comfort zone to achieve success, which will lead to more comfort later on. The universal themes of Cancer and Capricorn's axis are the balance of comfort versus growth and inward success versus outward success. And while we're on the subject of spectrums, I think it's important that we address the hemispheres as they apply to the Wheel of the Year and the zodiac wheel. As we all know, the traditional pagan Wheel of the Year, which modern witches have borrowed from the Wicca religion, which has borrowed traditions from ancient European festivals, is oriented to the northern hemisphere. And based on my experience communing with witches from all around the world online, it's most common for pagans in the southern hemisphere to reverse the wheel to appropriately fit their seasons. And what's really magical about this concept of reversal is that it too reminds us not just of the imperfection of the northern hemisphere biased wheel of the year system, but it actually shows us the perfect balance of the universe when we expand out of that northern hemisphere biased perspective. You see, even though the southern hemisphere is celebrating the winter solstice when my neck of the woods is celebrating the summer solstice, that doesn't render it totally contradictory that it's Cancer season regardless of where you live. It actually still makes sense. Just as summer represents the season of emotional freedom and receiving, winter represents the season of responsibility and generosity towards others. They're both two sides of the same coin, and this axis teaches us to both give and receive. This can be an especially interesting experience for those living in the southern hemisphere who celebrate both the Wheel of the Year and Christmas. In December, they're celebrating both Litha and Yuletide traditions at the same time, which imparts a different perspective into the wisdom of the seasons. If this is something that interests you and you would like a Southern Hemisphere perspective of it, I highly recommend that you go back and watch the Christmas 2023 video by the Rambling Rose that she posted this past Christmas. Regardless of what hemisphere you live in, she has a lovely channel, and I highly recommend that you follow her. In my practice as a domestic witch and a green witch, this is a time of year when I'm making my outdoor space as cozy, comfortable, and fruitful as possible. But at the same time, I'm also gardening, foraging, preserving produce and herbs, and learning homesteading skills that have an end goal of keeping me fed, healthy, and comfortable later on when winter returns and I'm inside more again. Surrounding this Cancer season, we have the full moon in the sign of Capricorn, the cardinal sign of the feminine earth element, which this year is on June 22nd, just a couple of days after the summer solstice and the start of Cancer season. I consider this one a twofer because since in my mind, the summer solstice takes place around June 22nd, and this year the full moon is also taking place around June 22nd, it just feels like that's going to be a really powerful couple of days. In fact, when we think about it, the summer solstice is the same concept as a full moon. It's that height and fullness of a cycle before the waning section begins. So this is going to be one of those really powerful years when we've got the full sun and the full moon happening on the same day. So if you want to do some really powerful celebrations or magic, I feel like that's going to be a really good day for it. Then the next week is the last quarter, aka waning moon in Aries, the cardinal sign of the masculine fire element. Then there's the new moon in Cancer, the cardinal sign of the feminine water element. This is that obligatory conjunction between the sun and moon that results in a predictable new moon that happens in the same sign the sun is in every zodiac season. And finally, the following week, we have the first quarter waxing moon in Libra, the cardinal sign of the masculine air element. Now, notice that I've pointed out how all four of these moon phases are taking place in cardinal signs, which reinforces the overarching theme of Cancer season being a time of new beginnings. And notice how we can tune into the elements and their alternating masculine and feminine affinities to be both exerting energy effectively and be open to receive the benefits of doing so. From there, we shift out of this chapter of cardinal energy and into a new pattern relating to the fixed signs of the zodiac in time for Leo season in late July. Okay, so now that we're done nerding out about the what and the why of Cancer season and where it fits into the Wheel of the Year, let's shift into embodiment by delving into the how to embrace the season. Here are 4 powerful themes of Cancer season using the 4 elements as a guide. And again, how you go about embracing these ideas will differ depending on what your goals and practice are like, but for real world examples, I'll be sharing how I'm planning to tap into these themes. You can plan to focus on one theme per week in alignment with the elements of the 4 main moon phases discussed above, or you can simply go about them whenever you feel inspired to do so throughout the season. Water, celebrating Cancer season in a literal sense. Have you ever wondered why an astrological season would be called Cancer? It's because the word cancer meant crab in Latin, and apparently the disease was later given that name because of the finger-like spreading projections from the illness, vaguely representing crab legs. Gross, I know, but hey, knowledge is power. I know even saying or thinking of the C word can freak people out, so it could be helpful to know the original meaning of the word to sort of reclaim some of our power back from it. But circling back around to the point, the zodiac sign of Cancer, symbolized by the crab, invites us to delve into the spirit animal energy of crustaceans. Embracing the qualities of adaptability, protection, and intuition associated with crabs can enhance our self-love rituals. Just as crabs navigate both land and water, and can feel the vibrations of the water in order to choose what to do and how to protect and nurture themselves, we too can navigate the depths of our emotions and subconscious to nurture our inner selves. Just like the crab retreats into its shell for safety, it teaches us to protect our boundaries and nurture our inner selves. The crab's ability to navigate both land and water signifies adaptability and emotional depth. Embrace the energy of the crab as a reminder to trust your instincts and honor your emotions. How, you ask? Well, any way that speaks to you, really. But for some seasonally relevant ideas, here are some suggestions. For many of us, this is that time of year when being in or near water outdoors actually becomes plausible for the first time this time of year. As I mentioned in the previous video about Beltane and Taurus season, I'm not one who's likely to strip down and go swimming on the 1st of May here in New York. But this time of year, when it's truly starting to feel like summer weather, the ocean calls and I feel the irresistible urge to go to sea. And by ocean and sea, I of course really mean lake, river, and stream, since I don't actually live super close to the coast. While some of us may wish to imagine a water witchcraft adventure as looking like that maze you've seen in The Craft, the fact is, for most of us, it won't be quite that formal, much less that dramatic. At least I would hope. We don't need any dead whales washing up on the beach. But if you're not in a position to sneak out into an uninhabited secret beach at night to call the corners with a coven without scaring away the muggles, most of us can make a trip to some natural body of water to simply be present and cast a little spell for summer transformation. One simple and discreet spell you can do is something like a coin toss, or any spell where you imbue an object with magical intent and then toss it into the water to activate it in nature. Obviously, if you're watching this channel, I probably don't have to tell you this, but just make sure it's something that's either safely biodegradable or made of a natural material that isn't going to harm the wildlife. For example, once I did a spontaneous impromptu spell by simply tossing coins into the Niagara River in a touristy area where everyone else seemed to be tossing coins too. The tradition of tossing coins to make a wish has a long history in folklore and folk magic. As the coins are tossed into a fountain or well, the act of letting go symbolizes releasing the wish into the universe, allowing the energies to align and manifest the desired outcome. It's linked to the spirit of the body of water itself, or to fairies or local deities. It's a practice that transcends cultures and time, connecting us to the ancient wisdom of our ancestors and the universal belief in the power of intention and manifestation. And since it transcends culture to the point where it's become completely secular and normalized now, you can totally get away with doing it in public in a big, important body of water like the Niagara River without anyone even batting an eye at you. A more formalized variation on this idea is to craft an object at home, or in nature if you wish, to specifically use for the purpose of your spell. Once I adapted an idea from Silver's Book of Prosperity Spells, where I crafted a fish out of natural clay for a specific intention, and then tossed it into the lake at my local park. But even if you don't want to do any spell work with objects and tools, simply spending time in or near a body of water, great or small, engaging with the elements and ruminating on your desires can be a spell in and of itself. If possible, I highly recommend you take this season to go to an actual beach. Whether you live near something resembling a beach, or if you can plan a trip to somewhere beach-like, this is a great time of year for prioritizing a seaside adventure. I know we've already talked about other types of bodies of water already in this series, but honestly, there's just something special and different and magical about going to an actual sandy, wavy beach, especially on a hot, sunny day. The elements just don't play with each other like that in any other environment quite the same way. Now, I always thought that in order to be a true beach, it had to be on the actual ocean. But while writing the content for this episode, I felt compelled to actually look it up. And as it turns out, I don't think in order to be considered a beach, it has to be specifically on the ocean. Apparently, a beach can still be a beach if it's along a lake or a river. I think it's considered more of a legitimate beach if the sand or sediment is naturally forming rather than having been dumped there artificially like it is at the park near me. But hey, there are no hard and fast rules here. Ideally, though, this would be a beach where you feel safe to at least get your feet wet, if not actually go swimming. So do some research if necessary to find out which beaches are contaminated and discourage contact with water versus which ones are recommended for swimming. Feel the fire of the sun above in contrast to the cool water beneath your feet, and feel the sand, sediment, and shells shift beneath you as the waves ebb and flow around you. Imagine any old energetic baggage being sucked out to sea as the water ebbs, and feel the nourishing energy of Mother Earth when the tide flows in. Draw a pentacle or other magical symbol in the sand, and let the rising tide wash it to sea to activate the sigil. If you can collect the shell remains of snails and crustaceans, all the better. These can be used to arrange into a magical symbol to leave as an offering on the beach, or it can be brought home to make a magical talisman for your home, which segues into our earth element ideas. Earth. Embrace coastal grandmother witch vibes. Use items collected on the beach to make a wind chime or sun catcher to call in those Cancerian vibes of intuition, protection, and adaptability. As we mentioned earlier, Cancer season is a sign that also rules over the concept of a safe, comfortable, and intuitively crafted home. In fact, regardless of whether you can make it to the beach, Cancer season is a great time to tap into some of those coastal grandmother vibes that have been popular for the past few years, but maybe even going for coastal grandmother witch instead. How would a seaside witch's cottage look and feel, and how can you bring some of those vibes into your home this season? This can be anything from practical magic aunt vibes to full-blown calypso from Pirates of the Caribbean, if that's what speaks to you. Perhaps build a Litha altar in the sea witch style. Whether it's decorating with shell talismans, making a magical room spray out of beach water, doing some kitchen witchery with seafood, or going nuts like I did a few years ago and decorating entire rooms in the sea witch style while watching mermaid movies in Dawson's Creek. This season invites us to bring the enchanting energy of the sea into our homes in some way. In my practice as a domestic witch, I like to have each room in my home evoke the energy of one of the elements through visual themes. While I really had fun creating a temporary nautical theme for my dining room tablescape one Cancer season a couple years back, that isn't part of my normally scheduled program. Typically, my kitchen evokes earth, my living room/home library invites the air and spirit elements, and the garden is kind of an altar to the fire of the sun as well as the earth, obviously, and the dining table is a canvas for celebrating the current season. But the bathroom is the permanent residence of the water element. Since I'm big into bath magic, I always tried to have at least a few small symbols of the water element in my bathroom to represent cleansing, depth, nurturing, intuition, and overall goddess energy. So while I was on that nautical decor kick, I utilized the Cancerian energy to completely redecorate my entire bathroom as a permanent altar to the element of water. This footage here is from when I originally did it back in 2022, but I still have the same design going in my new bathroom, just not quite as dramatic because there isn't as much room in my new bathroom. But if you like over-the-top decorations like me, you may wish to do something similar this time of year. Air. Listen to mythology, siren, mermaid, and pirate stories. Combine that magical watery energy with the themes of the air element through the modality of watery tales. Did the mention above of the sea god Poseidon pique your interest? Cancer season is the perfect time to find an audiobook, podcast, or YouTube video that tells the stories of Neptune. Or even the goddess Venus, who in the zodiac is connected to air and earth, but was also born of the sea. And expanding beyond the Greco-Roman perspective, there are water deities in just about every culture's mythology. This could be a great time to learn about Oceanus, Manannán mac Lir, Nord, Mamiwata, Oshun, Ganja, Lord Barduna, Anuket, Mazu, and countless others. Or if mythical creatures are more your thing, learn about the history and mythology of mermaids, sirens, sea monsters, selkies, and all the other magical things of the deep. Even fiction and non-fiction tales of sailors, pirates, and ghost ships can be fascinating this time of year, not to mention the countless sailor superstitions, seafaring traditions, and sea witch folk magic you can get into. Whether you would prefer to listen to something while you are busy gardening, or if you are someone that actually has time to sit down in the lovely sun and read, this is a perfect time for diving into all of the magical nautical nonsense. Fire. Simply worship the sun. Around the Litha sabbat, which falls on the summer solstice, the energy of the sun is at its peak, radiating warmth and vitality. This is a time to bask in the life-giving heat and light that sustains all living beings on Earth. By honoring the fire element during this sacred time, we acknowledge the power of transformation, passion, and creativity that the sun symbolizes. Embrace the fiery energy of the sun and let it ignite your inner flame, inspiring you to shine brightly and embrace your true essence. Celebrate the abundance and growth that the summer season brings and harness the power of the sun to fuel your self-love and spiritual journey. There's an endless number of ways in which you can honor the sun and the element of fire during this time. If you're a journaling witch like me, I've created an extra special set of grimoire information and journal prompt pages all about harnessing the element of fire during the season of the summer solstice. You can get instant access to the printable download or order pre-printed copies at the link that's on the screen now through the Writing Witch shop, or you can join the seasonal living tier on Patreon and get instant access not just to this file, but also chapters on the other seasons relating to the elements. Another way to celebrate the Litha season is to simply have a fire. The bonfire is the most universal tradition for this Sabbath. From Nordic midsummer celebrations to St. John's Eve and Christian and Hoodoo traditions in Europe, the Caribbean, and America. All of these practices stem from the ancient notion that we should venerate the power of the sun at this time by creating our own mini sun on the ground. Gathering around a roaring fire under a starlit sky, sharing stories and enjoying the warmth and light can create a magical and communal experience that connects you to the ancient traditions of honoring the sun's energy during this sacred time of year. The crackling flames and dancing shadows can evoke a sense of primal connection to nature and the cycles of life, making it a powerful and transformative ritual for self-love and spiritual growth. Many times in my content, I've mentioned the concept of having a fire for multiple different Sabbats, and normally I try my best to offer alternative ways to work with the idea of fire for those who don't have immediate access to a fireplace or a yard for a fire pit. But just this one season, I'm going to say that this is a prime time to really stop making excuses and find a way to burn some wood. Trust me, I suffered through living in city apartments for many years in my 20s, which I go into depth on how that crafted my passion for nature in the video that I just released on my other channel. So I understand that making a fire happen can be challenging, but those times when I did get out of my comfort zone and maybe even out of town to have a fire in the woods, at a campground, on the beach, in a friend's yard, or even just in one of those communal grills at the local park have been some of my fondest and most memorable experiences of summer. Even if you can't have a huge roaring fire, a simple cookout and a barbecue can evoke the same sort of communal vibes with the smell of smoke in the air. So of course, there are no rules in a witchy path, and I am not gonna should all over you if you don't want to have a bonfire. But if you do, I invite you to put that little bit of extra effort in to make it happen. It is so satisfying. So this video was jam-packed, so I would love to know which of these 8 seasonal living ideas inspires you the most. Which ones are you most excited to try out this season? I would love to hear your ideas and inspirations in the comments, or just to say hello. And be sure to join us in the Writing Witch Coven to get a beautiful written transcript of this episode for your grimoire and to easily stay in tune with cyclical living. Memberships start as low as $11 per month, and we would love to have you. For more ideas on how to embrace the summer solstice themes, I invite you to check out this video right here. And if you've already seen that one and you're looking for something new, definitely come and join me on the other channel, which will be linked here as well. Litha/summer solstice/midsummer blessings, or whatever you want to call it. And until next time, blessed be.